Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode. Once again, I'm very excited to have a special guest. You might have heard of Woke Watch Canada. Today I have James Pugh. He's one of the founders of Woke Watch Canada, and I've been keeping up with the emails that I've been getting from the Substack, and I've been learning quite a bit. I'm really excited to have James here. He's got a lot of insight and a lot of knowledge. Before we get started, James, welcome. And if you don't mind, just introducing yourself a little bit, telling the viewers and the listeners what you're all about.
Sure. Thanks for that, Dave, and thanks for having me. Like you said, I'm one of the people that started Woke Watch Canada. So I'm a researcher, independent journalist. I write a lot about just wokeism and in general, but a lot of my published writings are about Indigenous issues, where I've been published in like the True North or Western Standard, Dorchester Review, Frontier Center for Public Policy, usually, but it's still consistent with like wokeism and the ideas that of what wokeism is made of, like postmodernism on one side and critical Marxism on another side, and how that is manifesting in public policy, whether that then affects education or Indigenous policy or other places like the judicial system in Canada. So really the big goal of Woke Watch Canada and my own work is to research and cover wokeism as a general topic, how it is just manifesting in our society in the way that it is in a very illiberal fashion, and how it's kind of seeking to make obsolete a lot of the traditional elements that made up a Western liberal society. That's what I kind of do. And part of it is we're anti-woke, I guess, but it's a weird thing to describe yourself as anti-something. So the other way of looking at it is that we're very just pro-liberalism, pro-democracy, and pro-capitalism. But in all three of those domains, not unchecked with no rules, out of control, responsible capitalism. Liberalism, but with not unchecked freedom, like what we have now. Like there's people talking on Twitter this week about the problem of wokeism in our modern condition is because of liberalism, because of the unchecked limits on freedom. And they make a good point. So we have to have a deeper conception of these things. We can't just be so black and white. Because, if we're getting rid of liberalism, we're getting rid of liberty. So obviously we have to iterate. We have to improve. We have to do whatever. So that's what myself and these writers are doing. We're not just critiquing the society and calling everything woke and therefore it's bad. We are trying to help people reconnect with what made our liberal societies great, those things that came out of Enlightenment rationality and the scientific method and the use of reason and logic and things like this. Because these modern methods are departure from those things, or departure from objectivity and empiricism and things like that. But I'm probably giving you way too much of an extended intro here. So does that answer your question, at least for who we are and where we're coming from?
Yeah, absolutely. I usually focus on one subject because, like you said, there's so many things, and you specialize in the Indigenous issues. I've been specializing in the gender ideology, but one of the things that I really like about what you've done, you and your team, is putting out these newsletters. Even though I know what's happening, I really like the information that's there because it really goes into detail about how it came to be and how it affects everything. And I really appreciate that because a lot of the conversations around wokeism is surface level, and a lot of debate is surface level. And a problem that I have is as soon as you ask a question that goes a little bit deeper, it's difficult to find an answer. One of the things one of the articles actually that I've even read recently, but has been on my mind, was this indigenous mass graves thing. Now, I went to Ottawa when that story broke, and they had a little, I don't even know what to call it, but they just had a bunch of things in front of Parliament over there, honoring all the people who died. But at I looked at the initial news story, and I'm an engineer by trade, and I don't practice engineering anymore. I do other things now, including this podcast. But I remember when they did the survey underground, so they could find these mass graves, I found it very difficult to know how they concluded that there's all these mass graves underground, especially since the data wasn't accurate and nobody was digging anything. And to me, I wasn't saying people didn't die, but I was saying, how can anybody make a national statement? Actually, this went international. How can anybody make such a big deal out of something that was not proven? And this is one of the many things why I don't really trust mainstream media anymore, because I find they fire from the hip and then ask questions later. And the way our culture is now is you're guilty until you're proven innocent. And the problem with that mentality, I find, is that the amount of lies that you can make are endless. You can always make up a lie, but the truth is the truth, right? So you can't make it up. But I find that we spend a lot of time debunking endless lies, and pretty much they can say anything they want, and then you gotta start debunking, which I think the person making the claim should be the person that provides the proof for that claim. But I mean, the problem I see with wokeism is, first of all, no responsibility, a lack of responsibility across the board for people's actions, and like I said, just accusations. It's very accusation-based ideology, and all based on words. So I'm very happy that you've started this, and I have seen you guys hard at work debunking lies, and I've been learning a lot just from reading. And I read a lot of things as well, so I try to limit my reading. But one of the things that I really do enjoy reading, that I get almost daily, is from the Substack. So how did you get started? Yeah, how did you get started? What lit under you to say, this is the direction that I want to go?
Well, probably the best way to frame that is, because I talk about this with a lot of the people I work with, is how did we wake up to wokeness? Because it seems like I've gotten the impression from watching your podcast too, that in the last couple years you became aware of something that you previously were not aware of. And
Absolutely.
That's the situation with a lot of people, because of the way the woke movement is so hidden and obscured from general awareness, from the general public. It's designed that way. It's designed to penetrate institutions, places that can actually affect change in society, while obscuring what it's been doing. So the public thinks that, we're about equity and anti-racism and all these great sounding words. It sounds like everybody's on board immediately. Nobody scrutinizes. So yeah, how did I wake up to this? Well, it was a weird pathway, because I knew that something was off with society in general, like Western society. And I was convinced it was because of technology. Like it was because of all the devices, and something like the iPhone and the mobile web, social web access, like that being something. But everything, even the television screen, the television technology, the television coming into our society and changing things. So I spent about a decade actually really obsessed with the ideas of Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian professor that studied media and the effects of media. So I was really kind of coming from that perspective. And then, for studying Marshall McLuhan, I got so much more than I bargained for. I realized that it's not just technology that affects human beings, it's all things that human beings come up with. So sometimes it's a technology, like a hardware, like an iPhone or something, but other times it could just be an idea, like a software, something that's not tangible. And so I do think it is our technology that is messing up society and making us go crazy, but not in a hardware sense. In a software sense, it's the ideas, it's the ideologies. That is really the, like Gad Saad calls them. I was on Richard Serrett's show yesterday, and we were talking about this book, The Parasitic Mind. And so this is Gad Saad, another Canadian professor, and he talks about them as thought pathogens, a mind virus,
Yeah.
So, it kind of started with an examination of technology, the effects of technology on people, because it definitely does. But that's just part of it. The technology is kind of almost like the substrate on which our ideas manifest and like thrive and perpetuate in a viral fashion across society. So that's kind of where I realized that. And then when I saw that other people were writing critically about things like neo-Marxism and postmodernism, and that movement that sort of manifested in the 1960s, academia, and that's been how that's been its growth, that's its origin and its growth ever since then. So this is a decades-long process. It's been called many different things over the years. At one point, we just called it political correctness. But today, we've kind of landed on wokeism. But at the end of the day, it's the software of society. It's our ideas. They're poisonous. They're dumb in a lot of senses, and we're taking them too seriously. Like example, you brought up the unmarked graves story, but you also told me that your interest was more the gender issues and stuff like that. Well, here is the connection between both those stories. Well, if you look at it through a postmodern lens, so under postmodernism, they favor relativism. So we've gotten rid of objective truth now, and we're saying instead that you have a truth and I have a truth, and everyone has their own truth, and we have to value them dependent on where we all sit in the intersectional hierarchy. So if, in the terms of indigenous people, they sit low in that hierarchy, they're considered to be an oppressed identity. So whatever they say must be believed. Their relative truth is higher than the truth of somebody that would be considered an oppressor. So I would be considered that, being from the Western tradition, and so would my traditions. The Western traditions of looking at things objectively and looking for empirical evidence, those are not favored in this equation under intersectionality. The oppressed person's ways of knowing are what are favored. And that is the justification for the saying that there's children buried in those unmarked graves in Kamloops. It's that there was a knowing, that the knowledge keepers had a knowing that they were there. And the ground penetrating radar, which, like you said, cannot detect an actual grave or a casket or a body, it can't detect any of those things. It can only detect a soil an anomaly or a disturbance. So,
Yeah.
But what they're saying is that the GPR results is a confirmation of the knowing. And when you layer on the fact that we have postmodern relativism, and we must believe the stories of oppressed identities, there you have it. That's why it works this way now. So we need to penetrate right to the idea level and say, it's not that anyone's lying, it's that everyone is conceiving of situations under a postmodern framework. And that's nuts, because most people in the country who didn't spend years in academia don't even know what that means. They want to deal with reality and objective truth, and it's completely unfair to impose some other system of knowledge on a nation of people that never asked for that and don't think that way.
Yeah. When I came out of college, I guess the system must have had some impact on me because when I went in with traditional values. I grew up in a Christian home. When I came out of college, I started to denounce my faith, and I did believe in this relativism ideology as well. Looking back, I mean, what a mistake. And but the good thing is that I'm able to understand how people think as well because I've been there. And it's very interesting that people hold on to these beliefs, and they hold them very closely. It comes down to core beliefs as well. And growing up, our family grew up in communist Romania, and I've noticed a lot of this propaganda and the way that it's been used was very similar to the way propaganda happened during the World Wars and in communist Romania as well. And people were afraid to speak the truth. People were locked up. Things were given. And it was the same thing, right? Like with communism, everybody gets everything. Everybody has food. Everybody has jobs. And of course, this is something that everybody wants. Everybody wants to live. But the problem is with equity in place that the people who have lots, it gets taken away from them to give into the people, which takes away all incentive. So when I think of the parasitic mind, to me, a parasite sucks things out. It only takes. And I think the biggest mentality that is parasitical is victimhood. And I'm not really sure that we're doing real victims any favors, because the real victims are the ones getting lost if everybody thinks they're a victim. So unfortunately, we've come to a point in society where it's very hard to trust what people say and their sob stories. And people also seem to get in these cycles of just kind of reaffirming their bad decisions as well. So even if you are a real victim, it's very important that you don't stay in that victim mentality. And I've also been there, been through some things in my life, and you just can't be a victim. You just can't think like a victim. You have to move on. You have to overcome, and you have to turn these tragedies into triumphs. So in terms of the work that you've been doing, when did you get started with the Substack? And I remember, just before you answer, the thing that kind of triggered me was also the fact that once we started differentiating men and women, or I would say not being able to differentiate what a man and what a woman is, I knew something was very wrong. And when we started normalizing a lot of these affirming procedures, I knew that we're in big trouble. When you are telling a minor that it's empowering to get a double mastectomy and that's going to solve their inner pain, I think that's a very, very big problem. That's a huge cause for concern, in my opinion.
Yeah. You just reminded me, I didn't connect the unmarked graves thing to the gender thing, what you're talking about now. In the same way that we have to believe the Indigenous person and their claims for unmarked graves, as soon as a child makes the claim that they're trans or non-binary or something like that, they instantly become an oppressed identity that must be believed. So it's the same postmodern machinery at work here. And we could go through the list of issues, no matter what, like where is the fire in society? Well, we can find where the postmodern thinking is. Definitely.
That's right.
We can break it down and identify it. It's all the same, like machinery at work here, and probably maybe the easiest, fast, identifier of it is where like just you see the complete breakdown of reason and objective truth. It's like, well, where are the adults? Where are people who have like not who are not insane? And that's where you know that's you've encountered one of those fires, you know.
That's right. And I know the way the gender affirmation problem is tackled by, I would say, the woke culture, the government as well, is they say this is life-saving affirmation, life-saving medical intervention. When you attach life-saving before an issue, you are implying that if people don't want to participate, that means that they want the other people dead. And I've seen the same thing during this past couple of years. You need to mask up, you need to poke up to save grandma's life. And if you didn't, if you had objections, then you were basically guilty of murder. And it's the same thing with this affirmation. And I believe July 1st this year, or June 1st, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, the government of Canada is giving $75,000 to people who want affirmation procedures done. Which
reassignment surgery.
Yeah, which is absolutely insane to me. And if we really care about people, I used to drive somebody with brain cancer to the hospital, and that man, he was denied any medication once they ran out of the government approved medication. And they basically told him, well, now you got to go home and basically wait for your day to come. And then he applied to see if he can get on for clinical trials as well. And he ended up getting approved. Now, before they approved him, they said, we have this medicine, and I believe he told me it's going to cost $10,000 a month. And of course, he doesn't have that kind of money. So he went and he applied for medical trials, and he ended up getting the same medication for $10,000 a month, but he was part of the trial. And he did pass away. He's no longer with us. However, I don't recall the government being so generous with any other disease to say, here's a big lump sum of money. But when it comes to this issue, it's not only is it life-changing forever, you're forever on medication, and the mutilation that you do with your body is just crazy. But here we're going to fund this, what I believe is self-destruction, and people can't accept themselves. And it all comes from the lie. The lie is that you're born in the wrong body. I think that's a cruel thing to tell people, that you're born in the wrong body.
It seems worse to me because it's directing people who never would have even thought that to think that. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like there's an even deeper or worse layer to it. They're incentivizing it. Because like from what I've looked at, like it again, the gender issues is not really 100% my specialty. Other people on Woke Watch Canada write about it, like especially Shannon Douglas, who does the weekly gender report. You should interview him at some point. He's very knowledgeable about everything to do with gender ideology and trans activism and that whole side of it. But I lost my train of thought there. Sorry.
Well, I'm going to need that connection as well. Got to have him on this podcast.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, you were saying just in regards to the ideologies, that your specialty isn't the gender ideology, but in terms of the wokeness and the destruction that it's doing, if you wanted to finish up your thought from before on what triggered you and what lit that fire under you, because you've been learning about it Was there an event that kind of opened your eyes and you're saying, wait a minute? Because I know social media, you've mentioned social media, and that does have a profound impact. And I've actually erased
Yeah.
all social media from my phone. I have it on my computer just when I want to post and on my tablet. But if I'm out and about, there's no temptation to check social media or my phone because there's nothing on it in terms of that. And I
Smart.
found my mind is a lot more clear. And like I said, there's nothing there to see.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. One thing that really tipped me though was definitely the gender stuff when it intersected with kids. When I noticed, I heard about Billboard Chris, and I was, what's that? Why is that guy has this sign, puberty blockers? What's all that about? Like he's the person that really made me realize the gender stuff and how it affects kids.
I don't
So
know who Billboard Chris is. Did you want to
Oh, you don't know Billboard
clarify a
Chris?
little bit?
Sorry, he's a guy out west, but he's a advocate for kids, and he goes around basically North America, wearing a billboard, wearing like a sandwich board sign that says "Children can't consent to puberty blockers," and he has a camera. He has a huge following on Twitter. When he's out on the street with the sign, what he's doing is just looking to engage in conversation with people. So he wears a camera and he streams to the web and posts videos of it on Twitter and stuff, and he just engages with conversations because he does to people exactly what he did to me. I saw it online that that there was a Canadian advocate going around wearing this sign, talking to people on the street, and that made me like, what is that about? And so then I looked into puberty blockers, and like they're really doing that to kids. And irreversible surgeries, and then I was tipped off onto, like, from there it led to Abigail Schreier's book, and the rest is kind of history. You just realize it's awful, and then I'm a little bit more interested in the race side of it, anti-racism and critical race theory, because I myself have mixed kids. They're part black, part white, so. I'm a little bit more interested in that for that reason, and for the other reason, the gender stuff. I just find it to be so infinitely disturbing. I absolutely want to cover it, and I absolutely want to spread awareness to it. But seeing kids be taken advantage of and led around the way they are, and hurt and damaged irreversibly, is just so upsetting. Like, I find it very hard to do deep research into that topic. So other writers are much more focused on that. So I let them mostly cover it. I do write about it a little bit too.
You gotta pick and choose your battles. Like,
Yeah.
there's so many problems, right, that you have
Yeah.
to really focus on. And I was faced with the same task. Like, what am I gonna focus on here? This is the part that I really struggle with. So you focus more on the indigenous and race issues.
I do. Yep.
So tell me a little bit about that, especially when it pertains to schools as well. You have kids in school. I have kids in school. I don't know
Yeah.
if parents are aware. I do see the Waterloo District School Board, when they hire, they encourage preferences. They give preference to people based on the color of their skin and based on their sex and their gender and their race. It's right there. I remember
Yeah.
growing up in a time where you never asked these things, but right now I find that they're encouraging this behavior, which means that if you don't fall into this category, you're probably not going to be as high up for consideration.
Yeah. It is flat out indoctrination of young minds that are not fully formed, that they have a captive audience all day, 5 days a week. It's it's not by accident. Like, have you looked at any of the early literature about this stuff? Like Paulo Freire, he wrote a book in the 70s called "The Pedagogy of the Oppressed."
I have not heard about it and I have not read it, but yeah,
He
let me know
he
about
wanted
it.
us- you've definitely heard his name because he's one of these like sort of the godfathers of the modern movement of education being a site of social activism, being a site of revolution, social revolution. You know, it's not about education first, it's about imbuing the tenets of social justice ideology into them. And this kind of thinking came from these people, Paulo Freire, and then he had a sort of a disciple. His name is Henry Giroux. He's the person who brought these ideas to Canada. It's called critical pedagogy. So it's these Marxist ideas, critical Marxism, mixed with some postmodern ideas. But even though those are two sort of separate academic strains, what they share is that, in common, is that they're both a overtly negatively skewed mode of analysis of Western society. So they reinforce each other, you know? They're two people who have a common enemy. That enemy is Western society, period. So there's just two different ways of hating on Western society, and they have come together in academia. And that's like that's the manifestation of all these ideas, and we see it with critical race theory and anti-racism. We see it in all the way in the indigenous issues. It's with decolonization we see it, or with indigenization.
Can you give the listeners and the viewers just an overall summary of these things, critical race theory, the decolonization? Just give like an overall summary and what anti-racism means, because a lot of the people listening, they might not be aware. They hear these terms, but they don't know what they mean. What do they mean when they hear them?
Whoa, it's hard. Okay. The first thing I think that a really important thing to understand is that this set of ideas that is perpetuated by academics who have sort of given up on academics and they've taken on an advocacy role in their minds. So they're advocating for what they call social justice. So whereas academics used to be truth seekers, objective knowledge, all that kind of stuff, education now, and I'm talking K through 12 through university professors, they're about bringing about a situation of societal transformation. They want everybody to have a critical consciousness. So that's the first thing we got to establish, that the people who are the knowledge producers of society have switched their goal. They have a different goal now, and one of the ways they're achieving the goal is through obscuring things. And the best way they do that is through the use of like a Trojan horse type method of language, where language has two meanings. There's the meaning that seems friendly and very acceptable to everyone who hears it, and then there's what they really mean. So that's what's hidden inside the Trojan horse. So over and over again, that is what's happening. That's why the ideas are able to slip through and crazy stuff is able to actually take root in reality, is because like our sense of knowledge and how we're using language is being kind of like weaponized and obscured. What do these terms mean? One of the first terms that is obscured is the term critical. When people think critical, they are thinking of like critical thinking, which is a good thing. But when these academics and these activists, woke people or whatever, social justice warriors, whatever you want to call them, when they say critical, they're referring to a mode of neo-Marxism. And if you don't know that, like why would you know that? And why wouldn't they just say neo-Marxism or something else? In fact, they do when you start reading their texts, their essays and stuff. They like there's a great book called The Critical Turn in Education, written by Isaac Gottsman. And he's someone who is one of these academics, a social justice warrior academic, and he gives the history of all this stuff, and he's proud of it. So They don't hide any of this stuff. Critical means critical Marxism. So he actually uses the term critical Marxism to refer to a mode of neo-Marxism. And then, but people who don't spend time in academics, they might, like in a university, they might not even really realize, like, okay, what is Marxism? What is neo-Marxism? What are all these things? To be really quick about it, the neo-Marxists or the critical Marxists, they reject classical Marxism. They call it vulgar Marxism. That's the old Marxism, the class-based Marxism, where people were thought of as struggling for class-based rights. There was the oppressors were the people who owned the means of production, and the proletariat, the oppressed, were the workers and stuff. So that movement was just about workers having more class-based rights. But capitalism after World War II was successful. So the people who wanted to bring about socialist revolution, Marxist revolution, they needed to find creative ways to do it, because nobody wanted to do a class-based Marxist revolution because they were too busy enjoying their successful lives that capitalism provided. So the neo-Marxism is about changing the oppressed people to the identity politics stuff. So all the people that belong in the so-called oppressed identity classes, indigenous people, trans people, women, black people, BIPOC people, whatever, all the people who are not white men are now that proletariat. They've been proletarianized under this neo-Marxist, cultural Marxism, sometimes it's called, but actually the best term I think is critical Marxism. So that's what critical is right away. You see how obscured that is for them to just drop the word we have to have a critical consciousness, just to drop that in one of their talks or into some of their literature. And what I just explained is what's really intended by that language, whereas they know and they know very well that everyone is going to take that as, a critical thinking. You have to have the type of consciousness that is like critical thinking. You scrutinize things, you're skeptical. Yeah, we're really, really good. It's not what it's intended at all. To have a That's critical right. consciousness, like a neo-Marxian mode of analysis, to imbue that means to want to dismantle capitalism, for example. Want to dismantle liberalism, to think that liberalism is racist.
It doesn't seem like you can make any statement nowadays that doesn't fall into some kind of oppression category. If you're, really good at something, then you need to check your privileges because somebody else might not be as good and you're kind of able-bodied or whatever. Literally anything has been fill in the blanks. You're good at this, you are blank. And if you don't have any empathy, it really manipulates people's empathy as well against them and people's compassions. And like I said before, if you don't, this example, Black Lives Matter, right in the title, it's not that people's lives don't matter, but if you say all lives matter, because we're all people and everybody's life matter regardless of the color of their skin. If you say all lives matter, then suddenly you are an oppressor because you want a certain group of people dead because it's in the title that their lives matter, right? And just simply acknowledging that the color of the skin has nothing to do. I find in a very ironic way that this ideology is the one that's segregating people and labeling them and putting them into classes and is racist, right? And I suppose this might be a good time if you wanted to explain the anti-racism racism.
Yeah, it's different than critical race theory, even though it comes from a different tradition. Even though they share very much of the same now, or so they share very much of the same thinking or whatever. And now the way it is, I guess in 2023, it's almost virtually indistinguishable. The anti-racist practices critical race theory or something like that. But
They,
in our series,
to me, they are indistinguishable. Like when I hear one,
yeah,
I immediately think of the other. And I don't know if that was the intention, but that's certainly the impression that I get just as a normal person. And I'm sure other normal people, just like me, because like you said, nobody really has the time to dig into all these subjects. But a normal person like me, just going about with my life, when I hear these terms, to me they're interchangeable.
yeah. Yeah, you got to sort of think about wokeism, all of it, as just a basket full of different sort of academic disciplines and ideas that different thinkers have specialized on or focused on or written about extensively, and it all sort of comes together. It mutually reinforces each other. So I thought the same thing about anti-racism and critical race theory as you did. I collaborate with a historian. He remains anonymous. We call him Mr. M. And we've been writing a series. We publish it on the newsletter called The Great Illiberal Subversion. And part of that series, we had to delve deeply into anti-racism. Like the term, we look at the terms, like where they come from and who started using them, what papers were citing them, and like where they came from. And it was very much connected with race relations. So governments formed race relations committees. This is something that happens like throughout the sort of late 60s and 70s. Race relations committees were formed usually as the result of something that happened out in the public involving some kind of racial tensions. Usually they were pretty minor events, where definitely there may have been some racism there, but we looked at a whole bunch of different examples, and what we find is that there's a pattern where some kind of racist type of event happened, or an event that people just decided to call racist, even though it probably wasn't. It was maybe just a bunch of idiots being idiots. But anyway, it gets exaggerated, and the media blows it out of proportion, and they do certain things every single time. Like, for example, if there was a black person killed by a police officer, one thing the media would always do is say, okay, we're going to go to the black community for comment. But they don't go to the black community for comment. They specifically go to black activists for comment. They go to people who already believe and have completely dedicated their lives to dismantling police and are completely convinced that that white people are completely racist and the police are the most racist institution. So they're not going to the community for a representative reaction to what happened. They're going to just the activists, but they say it's the community. And they put the microphone in front of them and they amplify that. We all see the way journalists act nowadays. They don't ask any questions. They just put microphones in front of activists and amplify messages. And then once that message has been amplified, there are calls to action to do something. There's outrage now. The media, the activists have stoked hysteria. There must be something done. There's calls to action. So what's being done in these cases, or what was done historically, and this is all over the West, not just in Toronto and Ontario where it happened, is a race relations committee gets formed. And usually it's supposed to be a temporary thing where it's a committee. They're going to come together, they're going to put the heads together, and they're going to solve the racism. But then, like all these things, it's a process of like concept creep and a liberal behind-the-scenes subversion where they take over and they colonize things. So a temporary race relations committee turns into a permanent anti-racism directorate kind of thing. And it does have its origins in the British Institute for Race Relations. And if anyone wants to look it up, there is on our series, The Great Illiberal Subversion, which you can find on Woke Watch Canada. We've done a few essays about anti-racism and about its British origins with the British I think it's called the British Institute for Anti-Racism. And all of those things kind of tie in with the with what we saw, the emergence of the formation of race relations committees to anti-racism directorates to then anti-racism policy, which is the final stage, policy, law, and that's where we're at now, where they're trying to criminalize, well, even my speech. To deny that there is systemic racism is racist, according to anti-racism. So if they get their way, it'll be put into public policy and made law that everything I've just been saying is complete racist hate speech, and I should probably be locked up for it.
Yeah, that's the irony in all of this, is that the projection is strong on this, right? And this systemic stuff does end up really becoming systemically racist, right? Especially when you implement it in laws. And in terms of schools, how do you find that this plays out from your experience? Have you noticed a lot of anti-racism? I see these posts all the time on social media. As a matter of fact, our school board, when they post on Instagram, it seems to be just a calendar of events and celebrations from around the world with accents of anti-racism and gender ideology sprinkled in here and there. What do you think the kids at school are being taught? Are they taught that some kids are oppressed and the other ones are the oppressors? How is it playing out?
It doesn't seem like it's a big emphasis at my kids' school, which is shocking because my kids go to a Peel District School, which is a super woke board.
They are renowned worldwide.
Yeah. It's all the boards around because we're such the city, Toronto, even where you are, I think we're such a progressive hub that all the school boards are super woke. But my kid's school is only a grade 1 to 6, or kindergarten to grade 6. So it's small, and for some reason, it's not too bad. But I have noticed it in the communication that they send to parents in the form of the email newsletters coming from the school. Especially a couple of years ago, it almost seemed like every week there was emails coming to me about anti-black racism. Now it's less that, but it's kind of like what you said. It's the calendar is filled up with a lot of the Peel District School Board is Wicca. I've never even really heard about that until I started looking into wokeism stuff. But that's some kind of have you heard of Wicca?
I've heard about it. I don't know anything about it. I've heard the name.
Yeah, I mean that's something that's all over the calendars. You probably see that mentioned more than Christian. December is Christian Heritage Month. But there's a lot of non-Western things celebrated over and over and over again. And like you said, a lot of things that are pointing to some kind of oppression being pointed out in some way. We just had Black History Month, right? And then right into the next month, there's a whole week of something like Black Mental Health Awareness Week. Literally a week just after Black History Month ended. So it's not that should be a problem with bringing any kind of awareness to issues that affect Black people, but when you continually are pointing to cultures or issues or things that are of other people than those in the majority population, then that's I have concern about that. That's doing a lot of things to negative things to all the students,
That's right. Yeah, one of the things that I can't even take seriously, to be honest. As soon as I see it, I can't believe we're doing this. Is this land acknowledgement stuff?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't even think we're paying any taxes. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe there's been some policy changes that if we're acknowledging the land, we're also giving them our tax money. But as far as I'm concerned, we're on crown land in Canada, and we're giving our taxes to the government, our property taxes and stuff. Where did this land acknowledgement? It seems to me to be a have a lot of religious uh, sentiments to it. It's kind of like reciting a prayer in the morning.
Yes.
And when I heard, to me, it's kind of cringy when I hear it. And then kids are made to see it. Kids are made to recite this ritual in the morning. I don't know if all the schools have it. I haven't heard too much about it, but every time I'm at the board meeting, they do this land acknowledgement thing, and it's just cringy.
Yeah, it's cringy. It's ugh, I can't say I can't say anything good about it. Um, what what I would say it's part of is a part of a bigger environment that a group of people that's been called the Aboriginal industry, and this makes up like the activists, the indigenous activists. So that indigenous activists would be both indigenous people and non-indigenous people, but it also makes up all of the activist academics that work in indigenous issues. Everything from anthropologists to historians to all those people that the people that I was mentioning before that used to be academics but have changed their role in society and now they're advocating for something. So they make up a portion of the Aboriginal industry, but probably the driving portion of that industry is the lawyers. The Aboriginal industry is about rent seeking based on grievance. So this is this is part of that. The land acknowledgement, I would say, is a part of a greater set of processes. That is what the end goal is to constantly be calling on or pointing out historical wrongs, finding historical wrongs, inventing historical wrongs, whatever the case may be, in order to extract transfers from the government, which is something that's been going on for decades. One of the things that I've done in my work in Indigenous issues is looked at some of the academics, like real academics, who study Indigenous spending. How much of it is on programmed things, things that are budgeted and intended to help Indigenous people, and how much of it comes about because of say a class action lawsuit, because a band or a group of bands are claiming that there was a historical wrong or something like this, and so they're asking for billions. And there's a whole another conversation there, but it is most of I'm extremely critical of Indigenous issues, and I have a reason why. While these rent-seeking processes are happening, so while all the lying and obfuscating and scamming is taking place, we have an underclass in Canada that's the largest growing population. And that would be the Indigenous people that are living on very remote located reserves or in like urban ghettos. Indigenous Canadians who are underserved, desperate, and suffering. Those people are being used. Their suffering is being used by this Aboriginal industry in many cases to justify greater and greater transfer of rent from the government. They're just rent seeking. And the money goes back into their processes. And the problem is the Aboriginal industry itself is so enormous. It's a huge bureaucracy of people. And many of the people involved actually believe that they're involved in Indigenous advocacy and things that are bringing about good things. But it is not beneficial to anyone, any Indigenous Canadian, to constantly be bringing up residential schools, for example, or unmarked graves, be transferring money, millions of dollars for greater and greater or more searches of ground penetrating radar for yet more and more unmarked graves that in almost all cases except for Kamloops are in known former cemeteries. So what's happening here? It's a lot of using sensational stories, playing on Canadians' empathy, and using the suffering of Indigenous people on reserves, the ones that are not, the money doesn't go to them. Some of it goes to them, but not enough that is affecting change. And Indigenous scholars have been saying this for decades, and we've had scholars like Ken Coates write even recently in the last couple of years that, you know, all this spending that we've been doing, even on the programming in Indigenous communities, is not improving conditions. They have ways of measuring community well-being index, and they're finding that, like Tom Flanagan, for example, did a paper that showed that Indigenous communities that received windfalls in the form of claim settlements, whether it be from a class action claims or maybe a specific claim, which is sort of a different process that a band can make a claim and get compensation from the government for some kind of a historical injustice, or when maybe a treaty wasn't properly fulfilled, a treaty obligation. Anyway, the deal is when Indigenous communities receive monies from the government for some sort of historical injustice, it does not result in an improvement in that community's well-being index. So throwing money at problems like this actually, in a lot of cases, makes them worse. Another example would be the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that awarded massive amounts of money to people. And there's tons of stories where, you know, people were given huge checks, $10,000 minimum, in many cases, much larger checks. And these were people with substance abuse issues. Now they had, you know, a massive amount of money to go and feed their substance abuse issue. So there are certain problems that money makes worse. But the narrative and what typical Canadians believe is, oh, you know, we're rich Canadians, we have to give them all the money, so because it's all our fault for the situation that they're in. But it's more complicated than that. It's really the Aboriginal industry itself wants this suffering of Indigenous people to continue. If we solve the Indigenous problem in Canada, then they have lost their means to extract rent. The rent-seeking ends for them. So it's perpetuating the suffering is part of the process.
Absolutely. And this idea, by the way, is not just for Indigenous people. I find this idea is across the board, right? For example, with homeless people, I was listening to a podcast where a guy that was working at a homeless shelter said the best thing that you can do is to not give a homeless person anything. If you give a homeless person money, first of all, to be truly homeless, I think only about 25% of the homeless people are truly homeless or so. I forgot the statistic, but a lot of people just beg for money. That's kind of their means of income. And then they have a home. And I know this because there's actually a person that I talk to all the time. And I've realized this person, I've seen them walk home, just seems to just change clothes at the end of the day and just walk home. But nobody knows this. And I always walk past this person. And I was, you know, to me, it's just a way of income. So anyways, the best thing to do with somebody who's homeless is to not give them any money, because a lot of these people do abuse substances. And of course, if they have money, you are only enabling this behavior. So the other thing they were saying is don't give them any food either. And he said the reason for that is a lot of these shelters that they go to for food also has counseling services. So if you give them food and money, you are giving them a reason to stay on the street, and you are not giving them the opportunity to go back and the possibility of getting some counseling. So we see how good behavior, what we think as good behavior, is actually enabling people. And Romania had a huge problem with this as well, the gypsies in Romania. They were pretty renowned around the world, and once the European Union opened everything up, they started traveling to other countries, and other countries didn't really know what they're up against. But it's the same thing. It's a begging lifestyle. And I was in Romania last year, and we passed by this little village where predominantly occupied by gypsies, and not all people are the same, right? Like they have a stereotypical reputation, but what they do is they go in other countries, other rich countries like Germany and France, and because they can travel Europe freely, and they beg for money, and then they come home and they build these big houses, these palaces actually. It's pretty interesting. Wow. But it's, yeah, so they show all their wealth, but they're actually a lot of them don't get finished because they don't know how to use money. They just spend it right away. So a lot of these houses, when I was going through the village, they have this big house that's under construction for years, under construction, and they have a tent in the backyard where everybody sleeps in. And the house is not finished, it's abandoned, but it's very elaborate, right? They've got a lot of big towers and all these things. So what I'm trying to say is this: when it comes to giving out and handing out, I think the indigenous issue is falling under the same umbrella. And clearly, we have not solved this issue because the amount of money that's been given away has increased. And I saw a documentary a long time ago that most of this money, so I'm not really sure how people in the indigenous community have their hierarchy, but I believe maybe they all have a chief or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I've heard that most of the money goes to the chief, and everybody else, the people who really need the money, kind of remains poor, to say the least.
We call them the neo-tribal elite.
I see.
So that would be the chief, their family, their friends, their close associates. They form a neo-tribal elite. So that the neo-tribal elite is part of the Aboriginal industry. They're the ones that benefit the most.
I believe that. Even when I wasn't into this stuff, I always thought it was very interesting because to me, just surface level observation, like I know nothing about these people. I know nothing about their society or their history or culture or anything. I know nothing. But just as an outsider looking in, just as anybody else can make the same observations, I would say unbiased because I really don't know anything. I'm just like, look at this, right? I always found it interesting how we have a certain group of people that have tax benefits that other people wish they had, and all these things, and it's still not enough. I mean, if I had the tax benefits that these people do have, or the income, like, I mean, first of all, probably don't need to work, but that makes it worse, right? Because then you get kind of like in a handout kind of mentality where you're just expecting. I think it's a vicious cycle.
Well, there's many indigenous communities, so reserves, that are entirely dependent on the government. So if the people there, some people are not working at all, so they get a welfare check. But if the people there are working, it's a government job. It's some sort of government jobs. And a lot of times they're just creating weird like jobs, give them a role, give them anything. It's instead of, in some of these cases, like we're talking about very small communities. Like sometimes it's just a couple hundred people or less even. And the idea is that a reserve or a community like this, a band, we're to believe that this is a nation, a First Nation. and we're to have Canada is to have a nation-to-nation relationship with them. But a band of 250 people, or even 600 people, living out in a remote location in Canada that you can't even access by road. They're not in proximity to any kind of an economy, and the people are suffering immensely because they don't have access to proper services. And there's all kinds of issues on these places in terms of like substance abuse and child neglect and child abuse and women being abused, and it's a disaster. But again, the postmodern conception, cultural relativism, is that we have to stay out of it. We have to let them, return to their cultural roots or whatever they want to do, practice their traditional ways and traditional knowledge, and they're somehow going to be able to do that. But they're so far no. They're dependent on Canadian taxpayers, and the money that we give to them is not improving their life condition. And that's the thing. When we criticize this, it's not that I'm saying that, we shouldn't give them anything. We should cut them off, leave them on their own. Absolutely not. Indigenous people who need to be integrated into society some way, they need access to services. They need help. They need health services, education. The rates of fetal alcohol syndrome, for example, it's way off the charts on reserves compared to the rest of Canada. These are real problems that need to be solved. And the big change in thinking is we have to shift away. In many cases, some of these reserves, the people should be moved to other places where there's more opportunity and whatever, because we're sort of perpetuating their isolation, their dependency, and they're suffering by just giving them enough money to keep it going. Just like you say, a welfare type lifestyle. It's not that robs people of dignity. Communities don't thrive that way. And kids are born into a situation with very little opportunity, right?
It's very, very interesting. What an interesting problem, because once you get into this mentality, in anything, in any addiction, in any lifestyle that's dependent in some way or another, whether it's dependent on money, dependent on a relationship, where you have codependency or drugs or addiction. And I know I've had my struggles that I've overcome, and you have to realize that you need to make a change in your life. And the reason I say that is not because I want to be a mean person, is because I had to do it myself. I had to realize that my own methods, if I want change in my life, I need to make the change that I want. Or else how can I expect different results if I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again? And this was a big reason too why I got this podcast started, was because if instead of me just complaining about what's happening and did you guys hear what happened at the school board and stuff, how could they do this? Is there anything written down? What can anybody do? Instead of me just complaining about it, I'm just going to have people like you where I just discuss. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to the school and I'm going to delegate. How can I expect any change to happen if I'm just venting in the basement? Nothing's going to happen, right? Except I'm just going to vent and rant to myself and like I said, I think people need to take action, and that's the biggest thing I encourage, especially men, right? I encourage men to stop, even, if they say like, oh, white men this and white men that, look, it doesn't matter. I don't care what these guys say. It doesn't matter what category, what they put me in. They can't shut me up, especially when it comes to my kids. I think men need to protect women and children. And that's even in this ideology, when we are allowing biological deviant men to enter women's spaces, take over women's sports, and making everybody uncomfortable so they can feel comfortable. To me, that's gonna be a no. Like, absolutely
Yeah.
not. I would do not stand. And this is, I think men need to rise up and stop. If men are having this "I'm oppressed" mentality because I'm white or whatever, I honestly, like, I don't really feel sorry for them either. If you want to change, just do something and stop. I don't want to hear any more sob stories. Um,
Yeah.
Anyways, what I'm trying to say is I don't want to be coming off as a person who's not understanding when it comes to these issues. But I do know from my personal experiences, overcoming hardships, overcoming addiction, overcoming victimhood mentality, even as a real victim, if something, if I'm put in a situation that I completely took me off by surprise, I need to work through it. And it's the same thing that I encourage everybody to do, including over here, we're talking about indigenous people. Things need to change because if you just accept, if you start depending on somebody, the government, clearly the government does not care. I mean, I don't know how many times people need to see it, but if you don't see it by now, then I don't even know what else to say about it. Go read Woke Watch Canada so you can see for yourself.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So, all right, James, just before we wrap up, I just wanted to, is there something that we did not discuss that you think it's important for the listeners and the viewers to hear? What can they do to be part of the solution?
Sure. Off the top, I should have brought up Lighthouse. Do you know about Lighthouse?
I do not.
Okay, cool. Well, you probably in since you started doing this work and delegating and running this podcast, you've been meeting a lot of like-minded people, right? You can see that other people are forming parents groups and whatever.
Yes.
Everybody that I know that, well, not everybody that I know, but everybody that I first met when we started Woke Watch Canada, I met in Lighthouse. So there is a national network of concerned citizens, parents, teachers, everyone that are kind of just like you, just like me, kind of speaking out against and organizing with others to speak out against and struggle against the sort of political indoctrination of kids in schools and sort of just wokeism in general. So the group is called Lighthouse. It's a great group, very informal network type thing, and hundreds of people are in it across the country, and it's people join it. It's a Discord, and then inside you meet other people that might have a similar way that they want to approach it. Maybe they want to run a podcast like you, or run a Substack like us. But that's the idea. It's kind of, we, like you asked, how are we going to get over this problem? One of them is going to be organizing with others. So one thing I try to say to people is, if you're a concerned Canadian who sort of is cluing in that something's up, you need to be part of a group, some kind of a group. Doesn't have to be my group, but some kind of a group that is doing something to struggle against this. No longer is it feasible for you not to be organizing with others. It's kind of like a counter-revolution, right? The woke are winning this struggle because they're very united, and they have been for decades, and they have a clear and deliberate purpose, and they're extremely organized, and they're good at what they do. They're good at grassroots illiberal subversion. So we need to be organized in a sort of a counter resistance, and that doesn't. And right now, our anti-woke movement is a little bit factional. There's some parent Christian groups, there's some anti-woke groups and everything, but I would like to see, and there's some maybe people that are more conservative, more people that are more classically liberal, but we really should unite. We don't want to have a divided anti-woke movement. We want to have a united one. So we should really all focus on like what the message of FAIR, for example, the pro-human stuff, just pro-human universal values. Put liberalism and democracy first, put students first at schools, put safety first. You know, like we don't have to overtly be anti-woke. We don't have to use that word woke at all. But yeah, so organizing, uniting with others, and I think the Lighthouse is a really, really good one. Catherine Coronas is the person who founded it. She's another organizer that does a lot of good parent stuff. She ran for trustee this year. Other people ran for trustee this year on anti-woke platforms, or I guess last year. Chanel Fall and Shannon Douglas they're all part of Lighthouse, as is all the people who kind of founded and contribute to Woke Watch Canada.
I have Chanel coming for a podcast right after yours this week. So I'm very excited to bring her story and the things that she's been through. So is Lighthouse a website? How can people stay in touch with Lighthouse and with you?
Yeah, they can reach out to me, and I'll put them in touch with the Lighthouse right now. Like, what we like to do is talk to everybody in person and get to know them a little bit, and then give them access to a Discord where there's all kinds of people discussing wokeism, doing research, sharing ideas, organizing little different things. But there is a backlog. So sometimes it could take like a few days, maybe even a few weeks before you actually get in. But you can contact me, so like wokewatchcanada@gmail.com, and ask about Lighthouse, and I'll put you in touch with whoever's doing the intakes.
Excellent. What a great opportunity for anybody that wants to get more involved and learn. And there's so many great people out there. This is why I've even reaching out to you and other people that I've had and other people that will be coming to the podcast who have so much more knowledge than I do. I know every time I have somebody, I'm always learning things, and I'm just talking from like a regular civilian, this is what I'm seeing kind of thing. Yeah. I don't even have a TV at home. I have no social media. I like to go outside. So I'd like to say I'm pretty in touch with reality. So I don't like to exaggerate the things that I say. I just look and I make an observation. Could be wrong, but I just, when I ask questions, I'm just wondering why it is the way. So James, I just wanted to thank you once again for taking the time to come on the podcast, to explain all these issues that are happening in our culture and in our schools. And if anybody would like to hear more information, see more information, I'm going to be placing all the links as usual in the description of the YouTube video. And I'm very excited for the opportunity that James is offering anybody that wants to be more involved. James, thank you once again for coming to the podcast. I really appreciate your time. And thank you for all the work that you are doing with the Substack. Keep up the great work. And for anybody else, thank you so much if you've made it to this portion of the video. And until next time, take care.